Catholic Television Network.
The Renaissance was chock full of polyphonic music, or music with multiple vocal lines sounding at once. And it was beginning to run alongside chant as standard repertoire for the church's liturgy. And that was only the beginning. Polyphonic settings of the Mass Ordinary were becoming more and more complex, rich in choral texture and soaring in range. But right up there with Mass composition was the motet, a piece of scripture or other religious text set to polyphonic music, for use in the Mass just as hymns and songs are today. The essential genre of the motet is our sacred note for today. Don't go away. Welcome back to the show. This is On a Sacred Note. I'm Stephanie Sconia, and I couldn't help but return to St. Paul's Parish in Harvard Square today to talk about a genre that pervades the liturgical music program here, the motet. The motet is a critical genre in our tradition, but we tend to forget that it underwent many changes in its beginning stages before it could be even consistently defined. At the time of its inception, circa 1200 or so, the motet served as a sacred text set in polyphony, which we began to talk about last time through the birth of organum. Carried over from organum into the early motet is the importance of the tenor line at the bottom of the musical texture, sustaining a Latin word or phrase. Now, two or more upper voices would expand on the meaning of the Latin text in the tenor, in the bottom voice. This text in the upper voices would commonly be in the vernacular language. So at the beginning of the motet's development, you had not only two texts going on at the same time, but two different languages. Over time, the motet started to move beyond the walls of the church and became more and more secular, and this accounts for the variety of styles and voices that were written into motets in this time, the medieval period and early Renaissance. For our purposes, we're going to fast forward into the 1400s. After some standardizing and development, we see the motet rising to the same level of importance as the settings of the Mass Ordinary. To counteract the motet's blurring with secular folk melodies and themes, however, composers made a conscious effort to write motets fully intended for liturgical use. And so they began to be consistently all in Latin, so no vernacular text on top of the Latin. Guillaume Dufay was an early champion of this genre, followed solidly by Josquin des Prés in the 1400s. Dufay's work carries with it the sounds of the medieval period, both in the harmonies that were favored at the time, but also with its strong connection to Gregorian chant. Early motets would often include lines of chant which broke up the sections of polyphony. The listener would pick up on the chant and be reminded of what text and theme is being sung. Josquin des Prés bridged the medieval and Renaissance periods with a beautiful foretaste of the most performed early music of the church next to chant, Renaissance polyphony. With his compositional style and mastery, we see the advent of an expressive and text-driven polyphony. Unlike the more mathematical medieval organum that we took a look at last time, this more mature choral writing involves vocal lines that are even more independent. In other words, each voice has a melody of its own that rises and falls with the emphasis of the text. In short, we might describe the polyphony of the Renaissance as having more pathos, more majesty, and a deeper consideration of the mood of the text being sung. So this is where Josquin thrives. We know that he was born somewhere in northern France and bounced around to various places for musical employment in the late 1400s, including the court of King Louis XI of France, the Sistine Chapel in Rome, and several other Italian city-states, so a pretty impressive career. He ended up in Ferrara, which was ruled by a prominent duke named Hercules. Hercules was not only an amazing soldier and keen ruler, but he was a deeply devout Catholic and hired an unprecedented amount of singers and organists for his chapel, and Josquin was a welcome addition. Josquin even composed a mass setting in honor of his employer, the Duke, and also wrote tons of other masses, motets, and secular songs. One of his most famous motets is a setting of the Ave Maria, excellent for use and during Advent. His music was known to be carefully crafted, again, to show the affect or mood of the text. The 16th century brought us Orlando de Lassus, or Orlando de Lasso in Italy, another huge sacred music composer working in Munich during the aftermath of the Protestant Reformation. You might say that Lassus's music is more compact. He accomplishes a great deal of harmonic intensity and unexpected musical changes in a small amount of space. His music is bold, creative, and highly expressive. He continues the trend of allowing the words and the moods of the text to direct the musical composition, in many instances employing word painting, where a composer will illustrate the meaning of the word through the music set to it. For example, if the words are the opening of Psalm 130, "Out of the depths I cry to thee, O Lord," a composer might begin the motet on low, soft notes, then add voices one by one, raising the intensity and volume and rising the pitch over the course of the phrase, so we get the sense of a person crying out louder and louder from the depths of his soul. By the time the Protestant Reformation broke out, and immediately after, the motet reached maturity and continued to be a staple of liturgical music for the centuries to come. After the break, we're going to visit again with John Robinson to look into how the genre of the motet enriches musical life here at St. Paul's. Stick around after that to hear some early Renaissance motets and luxuriate in this too often forgotten soundscape. We'll be right back.
Hi everyone, I'm Jay Fadden, and I want to invite you to join us Friday for This Is the Day. We'll meet Maureen Flynn to talk about praying and fasting for America during Religious Freedom Week. And we'll meet the Executive Director of the World Apostolate for Fatima in the U.S., David Carollo. So join us Friday live for This Is the Day right here on Catholic TV, America's Catholic Television Network.
It is here where you'll find the best marriage counselor, greatest healer, wisest teacher, and closest friend.
I need your grace. I need your favor. I need your mercy. I need a Savior.
Returned, and I'm joined once again by the wonderful John Robinson. Thanks for joining us again, John.
Thank you very much. Great to be with you.
Of course. So I want to remind our viewers a little bit about you in case they missed when you were on the show before. So you actually grew up as a choir boy and then did a lot of organ stuff in England, sort of working your way up the ranks. So how did that experience in England in such an immersive church setting prepare you for your role here at St. Paul's in both the church and the choir school?
Yeah, so I learned so much there. I learned everything I know really about conducting and playing the organ and repertoire too. So thinking about where I learned about motets and anthems and things, it was definitely that first-hand experience as a choir boy that started me on that path of experiencing some of the greatest music in the world and being able to be part of that every day.
Yeah, you were exposed to so much repertoire, I'm sure. Yeah, so you can bring that to your training here. So today we were tackling the genre of the motet, which of course has just spanned the millennia of church tradition. And it's hard to pinpoint it kind of in the Middle Ages because of its early development. So how often do you program motets here? At what points of the Mass? And who's your favorite composer?
Wow. Sunday morning we program a motet at the offertory and a motet at the communion after the proper chant at the communion then. And every day here we program a motet that the boys sing at the communion. So when I say a motet, I mean often they will have words in English, so technically I suppose that becomes an anthem, but I know that there's a lot of, we can talk about that, there's a lot of crossover between motets and anthems. Favorite composer is, impossible, I don't know at all. I love conducting Poulenc. But
interesting. I was going to ask you what time period, both, that you usually program here, but also what your favorite is.
So absolutely, so everything really from Josquin through Palestrina and the Renaissance, Purcell, the Restoration, and then Bruckner and Brahms and all of that.
So it's all fair game.
Yeah.
So did the form of the motet basically stay the same over the years, like once it's sort of standardized in the late Renaissance?
It's a very rich history, I think, isn't it? I think it begins, as you said, coming out of plain chant and plain song and starting with organum and then evolving slowly through the Renaissance. And it's often interlinked with the Mass very closely. And so you think about the Missa O Quam Gloriosum, for example, of Victoria, and that you have the motet, which is an intrinsic part of that Mass, and then the Mass is based all around the motet, so that the theme is pervading all aspects of the liturgy.
Yeah, that's interesting about how composers would use the motet melody in their Masses.
Exactly, yeah.
So how would they do that? How can you tell that that's happening in a Mass?
Well, I suppose if you know that, if you recognize the introit of the Mass O Quam Gloriosum, you'll recognize snippets of it occurring in other parts of the Mass as well.
Yeah.
But sometimes it's hidden very cunningly in an inner part, maybe in the tenor part.
Right. It helps that the composers name the Mass after their motet, so we know it's there. So you mentioned the anthem, so I have to ask that's a very Anglican and in general Protestant name for their counterpart of the motet. So is there really a difference between the motet and
historically,
the anthem?
Historically there's a difference. I mean, the way that the anthem, I think, is first mentioned in the 1662 edition of the Book of Common Prayer, where it says in choirs and places where they sing, "Here followeth the anthem," which is at the end of Evensong, which of course evolved from Vespers. So I suppose it takes the place of where the Marian antiphon would have come originally in Vespers. And then it's usually, I think, historically in English as well. So great anthem composers originally might have been Byrd, Gibbons, Tye, Tallis, people like that. And it goes into Purcell and Blow, of course, after that, and Tomkins, these great writers of anthems and verse anthems. But I think it's an interchangeable term now. We often talk about anthems or motets, whether it's in Latin or English.
Yeah, I mean, I know a lot of motets that are in English, and they're not necessarily an Anglican anthem. Yeah, you're right. So this is such a huge area of church repertoire. Where can our viewers start in sort of delving into all of this? Is there a resource that's out there on the internet or otherwise? Yeah,
so, I mean, free. I would just start on YouTube and Google Westminster Cathedral Choir or St. Paul's Choir, Harvard Square or somewhere, and have a look at what's there. And then, of course, the resources, as you say, are enormous. So if you just look at compositions by anybody, really, composers, Palestrina, Byrd, Tallis, whoever, you're going to come upon motets pretty quickly. Yeah, and a place, you mentioned the choir here, that our viewers can find it. I believe you released an album recently. Did indeed, can you tell us about that? How many motets are on there? Many motets, It's an album called Ave Maria. It's available everywhere online and from our website. And it features many works in Latin and English as well, most of which would be described as motets. Awesome. Well, I'm going to have to take a look at that and tell all my friends. Please do. Yeah, it's exciting. Well, thank you so much again, John, for being here and for sharing your insights on all of this. Thank you for having me.
Home fire drills give your family a plan of action. In a home fire, you may have less than 2 minutes to get out. So when you drill, show everyone 2 ways out of the house, pick a safe meeting spot, and get there in under 2 minutes. Then practice home fire drills at least twice a year. You can even make them fun. So everyone knows the sound and exactly what to do when they hear a smoke alarm. Go to ready.gov/fire drill and learn how to prepare your family for home fires.
Where there is God, there is light, beauty, and above all, love.
Every day, we invite you into a holy place, that you might find hope and the fullness of life.
We are more than a TV network. We're a community of believers.
Celebrate the sacred mysteries, listen to God's word, and join us at the altar for each and every day.
And our work is all for you.
Welcome back. I'll be joining the Brookline Consort and members of the Church of the Advent Choir here at St. Columkill Parish in Brighton to present examples of motets ranging from the early 1400s to the very beginning of the 1600s. First up is Dufay's ethereal Ave Maris Stella. After that, Josquin's celebrated Ave Maria. And finally, a brief motet by one of the high Renaissance masters, Orlando di Lasso. Notice how the musical style changes between these motets and how the music reflects the theme of the text. Above all, relax and enjoy these wonderful works. Motets were written on pretty much any theme or prominent Bible verse you can think of. The idea was to use motets at key points in the service to comment and reflect on the content of the readings for that day. If the gospel on a given Sunday is an excerpt from the Bread of Life discourse from John, or the analogy of the vine and branches, or the Annunciation, or Christ's birth, chances are there's a motet for it. Today, some parishes insert a motet at offertory and/or communion. There are thousands and thousands of these sacred pieces that are perfect for any time of the liturgical year, and they fall into varying levels of difficulty and number of voices needed. This allows local church choir directors to choose music according to the specific needs and abilities of the choir. There is no shortage of options available for Catholic church choirs across the globe, and we have the distinct advantage of adhering to a theology and tradition that has remained for thousands of years. That means that the music of Dufay, of Josquin, of Lassus, and all that came before and after, all of this music is just as meaningful and appropriate today as it was when it was written. Next time, we'll hash out the challenges of the Protestant Reformation, the Church's counter-Reformation that followed, and how these events shaped the music of the time. I'll get to introduce you, or perhaps reintroduce you, to a couple of my most favorite composers of sacred choral music, so please, join me next time for On a Sacred Note, coming to you from St. Cecilia's Parish in the Back Bay. See you then.
Ad